In my last episode, I talked about how Fallout New Vegas handles memory as you move between zones and how it leads to crashes. There were a few things I didn't know the answer to, so I asked the comment section, and well, ask a comment section, ye shall receive. You guys knew the answer to pretty much everything I asked, and I'd like to talk about all of that today. If you haven't seen the first episode, here it is. It's about 7 minutes, and considering you clicked on this one, you'll probably be interested in that one as well. So let's start with, does New Vegas have memory leaks? A memory leak happens when the program goes to the operating system and says, hey, I need more RAM. So the OS goes ahead, gives them some RAM, and they do their business. And when they're done, instead of giving the RAM back, they keep it. Now, sooner or later, that program is going to decide to do that function again. Now, what they could do is use the memory that they already have allocated, but they don't. They go back to the OS and borrow a little bit more RAM to do the same process again. Now, if this only happens once or twice in a sitting, it's not going to be problematic. But if this happens many times, suddenly that bootleg version of Minesweeper you're running is using 28 gigabytes of RAM. And yes, New Vegas does have memory leaks. Over the course of an hour or two, the program will build up enough unused memory in its pile to lag or crash. Interestingly, however, the memory management problem I talked about in the first video is not a memory leak. The memory is kept track of, held on to for the purposes of buffering, and deliberately let go of when the program says to do so. It's just done badly. Why the game was released like this, however, not the topic here, and I'll let you guys chat about that in the comments. Shouldn't a 32-bit program be able to use 4 gigabytes of RAM? Yes. Technically, a 32-bit program should be able to use this much RAM. Of course, when New Vegas was ported to PC, there were still 32-bit operating systems around. That meant that the whole computer could only be using those 4 gigabytes of RAM between all open programs and the operating system. If New Vegas tried to use 4 gigabytes of RAM, it wouldn't just crash itself, it'd crash Windows as well. So Fallout New Vegas and most 32-bit programs were at the time deliberately limited to 2 gigabytes of RAM. So why can't it use 2 gigabytes of RAM? Well, you'll have noticed in the last video, the crash point was well below 2 gigabytes. That's because what the task manager shows isn't all the memory being used by the program. It doesn't show video memory usage, but that still counts towards the 2 gigabyte total. It also doesn't show the RAM used by the associations Windows creates when a program opens up. If it sounds like I don't know what I'm talking about when I say that, that's very astute. The upside of these invisible uses is that they tend to be very consistent. So you can still predict if Vegas is about to crash even if you can't see them. Could someone run a mod to make Fallout New Vegas run as a 64-bit program? This is an interesting one, and the answer is no. The short of it is no, you can't do that. Could you make a mod to purge the memory at every scene transition? This relates to the first video again. So I fired up the GECK, which is the program you usually use when you're making a mod for Fallout 3 or Fallout New Vegas, and I think Fallout 4 might be a different one. I fired up the GECK. I found the McCarran Gate, and I tried to find any sort of flag or association that stood out from any of the other doors in the game. It's actually one of the few doors in the game that under script has none. So whatever it is that causes a purge at that gate, I couldn't find it. It looks like it's buried deeper in the code than that. That being said, there is something with regards to this which is perhaps a fair bit more useful. Let's say you look down at your task manager and it's running 1004 megabytes and you're thinking, you know what, it'd be nice if I could clean that up. Open the console, purge, cell, buffers, and there it goes. So while it would have been nice to have a mod that did this automatically, that's a pretty elegant solution right there. If you have the option to run the task manager on a second screen while you're playing the game, anytime it gets over a gigabyte, pop that in, clean it up. If you don't have the opportunity to run 2 monitors, say you're playing this on a laptop, every time you go through a couple big zones, just open that console, PCB, and you should be fine. So my initial plan for this video was to also include a list of mods that people use to keep the game stable. But I know when I'm watching videos, I'm not a fan of having to search through a video for the answer that I'm looking for, so I'd much rather do that as a separate video. It also gives me the chance to ask you directly, and I know there were a lot of comments about what mods you should be using for stability, but since there are already lists out there, I'd like to make a video that gives more value than just reading the descriptions off the Nexus pages. So I'd like to know what mods you guys are using, how well they're working, and what's obsolete, especially if you've done a playthrough recently. One person testing mods is an anecdote, but 100 experiences is something to hear. That one's next on my list, and I will see you then.